Well, you can choose to either hear me or not see me. It is up to you. Pick your poison. Okay, 1 second. You know, it's always good to have these kinds of hiccups, just at the very last second. Let's see if I can switch here. Ah, look at that. Here we go. Now you can hear me, these things happen. But thank you so much for joining today. I am so excited to have the React core team here. We're going to have a whole big Q&A thing, so feel free to toss in your questions. We've gotten a bunch of them. Thank you for following. We've gotten a bunch of them on the Twitter announcement for it, and so we have plenty of questions to answer, but feel free to pass in more. I am very excited to have you all here today. Ooh, it should be fun. Yeah, people are saying my camera's overheating again. That's what's weird. I turned it on right before the stream to make sure it wouldn't overheat, and if I switch over to it, yeah, no, it's just not showing up. Technology is non-existent. Okay, so that being said, we have the entire core team on, and I am going to switch over. And because I have weird camera issues, you're going to see my head floating around for just a second, but then it'll be right where it needs to be right after that. Okay, core team, are you ready? Ah, look at them. What
Yes, I'll just say
folks.
real quick that there is one person on the core team who is not here, who is Rachel. So it's not quite the entire team, but it's most of us today.
Nice. Well, everyone is great. I am going to switch to, oh, you know what? I've got to just kind of do this myself. Here we go. Oh, look at that. There's my face floating, and you'll see it. Well, thank you all again for coming. Would you mind introducing yourselves so that way people can know who you are in case they don't?
Yes, let's go top, I guess, well, I'll go first. I'm Andrew. I'm Andrew. I don't know what else we're saying, but I work on React. I'm mostly focused on like core algorithm stuff, so like concurrent mode, hooks, suspense, stuff like that.
Hey, I'm Brian. I work on React too, obviously, mostly on performance stuff like profiler and developer tooling.
So me next. Hi, I'm Dominic. I'm based in London. Lately, I've been working on the React event system and also things to do with accessibility, performance tweaking, and those sorts of things.
Hi, I'm Rick. I've been working with the React team for almost the past month now, and hopefully be joining the team permanently when we move to New York.
Hi, I'm Dan.
You're
I just
there.
took a small vacation, so I'm struggling to remember what was the last thing that I worked on. But I write some of our blog posts and tweets.
That's all he does.
I'm Sebastian. I curate ideas from other people.
Sure.
Hi, I'm Luna. I've recently been ramping up and working on the core algorithm stuff.
Cool. And also people are annoyed by the follow notification, so I'm just going to turn it off for a little bit. But also, all y'all are way too humble and do amazing, awesome work, and I'm very excited to have you all today. We have a ton of pre-submitted questions to the point where Andrew said that he would luckily be helping kind of figure out who should be answering what. But the first one that I think we've gotten a few times, but this one came from Twitter. What is a typical day of a React core team member like? You're working at Facebook, but you're also working on open source. It's something that not a lot of people do.
Yeah, who wants to answer this? Luna?
Called
Sure,
out.
I don't know. It feels like just working on any other team except you're working on GitHub, I guess. Like, whenever we were in the office pre-COVID, we would like I don't know, we'd like work in the morning, get lunch together. We have this thing we do called fika, like a couple times a day, where we would go get coffee and like talk about like whether it's work stuff, or like just like goofing off. Yeah, I don't know, just like a regular team.
Like most of us are. We have two offices where we work out of. At least pre-COVID, we had two main offices where we work out of. There's Menlo Park office, where all of us except for Dan and Dominic have been located, and then there's the London office where Dan and Dominic are based. Currently, we're all like moving to New York, but you know, a good chunk of us have been co-located, so it's allowed us to, you know, sit near each other and kind of socialize throughout the day, which is kind of a nice thing.
Neat. And so for someone who wants to have a life like this, maybe not at, you know, Facebook itself, but wants to work on React, how does one become a React contributor? Especially from a novice perspective, because there are some people where they're like, React is awesome, but they're not sure how to actually get it and help because it is a big, scary beast.
So, Abby, you want to answer that?
I think the first thing to do is kind of like want to get involved with us in one way or another, either on Twitter or GitHub issues or submitting docs requests. Whatever you can do to kind of get on our radar is a good first step, because we're always looking for contributors in one way or another. But in terms of, I think one thing that is a little bit unique about the React code base in general is that it's so contextual. It's not many easy bugs, because then it would already have been fixed by someone essentially. So it's very hard to kind of have enough easy things to get started with, which is why we tend to more work on it full time. So we kind of expect most contributions to be people that essentially work full time, and that shouldn't mean full time and like free time, but ideally sponsored by a company. And currently we're mostly set up with Facebook people doing that.
Cool. Yeah, we're getting so many questions in the chat, so I'm going to get to those later.
I want to add something to what Seb said really quick.
Yeah, please do.
Contributing is a great way to join the team, and it's the way that most of us got our foot in the door with the team. But one thing to mention, Seb mentioned that like a lot of things in the React core, things like the React reconciler and stuff, it's a pretty steep barrier to entry. But we have sort of ancillary packages like the dev tools or the website where we get fewer people looking to contribute, but that's a great way if there's lots of need for help. So I will stick myself out and say that like if you're interested in working on the dev tools, hit me up on Twitter and we can chat. There's lots of stuff to be done in packages like that.
Yeah, other examples are like the hooks ESLint plugin. There's fast refresh. There's tons of stuff in the React Native world. I mean, our team doesn't directly work on that, but there are lots of opportunities there as well. Also, just like answering questions and triaging bug reports is enormously helpful. There's tons of stuff that isn't just like giant code features and implementation that is super impactful and is the stuff that we often kind of neglect, or is easy for us to neglect, because right now there aren't that many of us. So every type of contribution is welcome and appreciated.
Triaging bugs is such a huge thing in any open source project. You don't realize how many come in until it gets really, really big, and you realize, oh, please don't add another bug, don't add another feature. We just need to handle the ones that we have so far. And I don't think people realize just how valuable it is to know, like, this is a legitimate bug. Here's how you can reproduce it. These are the tags that should be on it. That's a major part of open source that people don't realize how big it is. Awesome.
Absolutely.
Oh, Brian brought in his cat. The chat has been very excited about the cat.
Half of the questions in the chat were where's Gatsby, so I figured I'd get that out of the way. Sorry. Cassie, some people in the chat are saying they're having trouble hearing. Is there any way we could bump the Zoom volume up a little bit?
I did bump the Zoom volume up, and I think it also has to do with just people getting close to their microphones. So hopefully we can get everybody heard and listened to in there. Cool. There's some Facebook and administrative stuff questions that people have asked, if you all don't mind answering some of them. it seems that there's been a decent bit of turnover on the React and React Native team. Does that impact the roadmap, and if so, how? And what happens if key contributors decide to move on from Facebook? What happens to the project, and how is it impacted?
Who should answer this?
Do you want to answer this?
I don't think anyone wants to answer. How about Rick? Rick, do you want to answer this, since Rick has also worked in React Native? Yeah, so there has been, I'll take a bullet. There has been some turnover recently. I don't really know how to address it like head on, because like each case is a little bit different. I will say just in general, it is kind of difficult to join the team, probably too difficult, which we're trying to make it easier. I mean, this event that we're doing right now is one of the small ways we're trying to make it more accessible and give people a little bit more insight into the workings of the team and what it takes to contribute. Like in an ideal world, we would have a team that's like 3 times the current size. And it's not for lack of want or need. It's just, it can be hard to scale a project like this to a large number of people. Another thing is like the types, a lot of people have this idea of what it's like to be on the React team, which is like to be a Twitter celebrity and go to conferences and, get lots of internet cred. And that's like part of it. But a lot of it is just like kind of hard slog work that's super impactful and valuable, but maybe not what everyone expects when they join the team. I won't say that's the entire reason why it doesn't always work out, but like it is a very particular kind of work that day to day might not be what you won't get the same rush that you might get working on a product, for instance. Like when you work on a product, you get some very instant gratification, like you get to ship something that is instantly used by folks. If you work on React, like I always joke with people from my perspective, I've been working on the same thing for like 4 years and it still isn't quite done, and that's concurrent mode. That's just like a whole other level of investment and time and return on hard work. So I really love it. I think most of the people here really love working on React, but I won't lie and say that it's easy to become part of the team, and we're open to suggestions and always trying to make it easier and more accessible to new contributors. As far as the roadmap, I don't think the recent turnover has affected it that much, except for maybe bandwidth. Like I think we're always a little understaffed in terms of the ambition of the projects we want to work on. So it's we really want to figure out a way to scale the team so that we can work on all the exciting ideas that we have and other people have.
When you mention ideas that other people have and stuff, one of the questions that was in the chat that I thought was pretty good are there any ideas that you've taken from like Angular, Svelte, Vue, Preact and stuff that you were like, oh, that's a great one, and figured out how to incorporate it into React?
Well, one is we stole a bunch of ideas from Inferno just by hiring Dominic. Dominic, you want to maybe answer this question?
Sure. So, I mean, we have always very interested in what other people are doing out there in terms of what other frameworks are doing and what new ideas are brought about. So a few years ago, we looked at building a project called Prepack that was to like ahead of time compile JavaScript, but we also try to optimize it for React components. And a lot of the emphasis around that was other frameworks at the time were exploring the compilation space. So Angular was exploring it with Ivy, Svelte was exploring it too. So we looked at ways of how we could try and leverage that and take some ideas from it. And although we didn't feel 100% from the output from that project what we wanted, we got a lot of ideas towards other things that helped to improve React along the way. So like, for example, hooks kind of came about sort of adjacently from the fact that we had this idea of how can we simplify things for a compiler. And also there's other ideas in terms of performance and just like how you can handle sort of problem spaces differently. And one of those is like event systems. And there's been some work in other frameworks as well in terms of how you can try and manage and deal with like delegation, reusability, recycling of things, and how we could bring that back into React. So we're always interested to see what others are doing. The kind of problem space is like how we can leverage that in a way that fits our roadmap as well. because we're working on things that might not always be compatible things. We always have to consider, for example, how things can work with concurrent mode, or how things can be backwards compatible, which is not something other frameworks always have to consider. For example, Inferno would remove something and like nobody would really care, that we can't do that. So like we have to be like, thoughtful of what we envision, how it all fits together.
For sure.
I can, one thing that is interesting, I think Dominic answered really well. Like, we're always looking at other frameworks that are similar, but we're also looking at what the user space is doing, both in user space LAN and smaller libraries in those ecosystems, but also in the React ecosystem. I think this actually dovetails very well with the contribution story. Is most people on the team has actually been contributors to the React ecosystem by building smaller libraries that then we can get ideas from and incorporate. And sometimes it's ideas like use reducer is very similar to the ideas of Redux, which is similar to the ideas of Elm. And we incorporate the actual ideas. And sometimes there's more that we see other libraries in the ecosystem struggling with something, and they're not able to build it in the proper way because they're missing that hook or feature or point in React where they can actually plug in on a proper way. And then we look at how can we incorporate a better hook for them so that they can make their library even better. Because I think React is not just like React Core, it's an entire ecosystem. And the way we get away with having a small team in the first place is that we have such a large ecosystem building and exploring things in user space as well. And I think we're trying to do more of that as well with some more work on events and interactions. So that's another way to kind of contribute and another way to how we get ideas from the ecosystem.
Awesome. Oh, there are so many questions all over the place. Oh, Andrew, did you have another one?
I just want to say, I think Dominic might have a hard stop in a bit. So there are some questions on the document that we collected that I know are kind of ideally answered by Dominic. So maybe we could talk about some of the events questions before he has to jump off. Does that sound all right?
Yeah, that sounds great. Cool. Then
Okay,
in that
cool.
case, I remember seeing in the past that there was an internal Facebook project working on React focus management. Are there any plans to come back to that topic?
Yeah, so we have like code names for all our projects internally, and that was one that we kind of took upon with our work towards a project called React Flare last year. So React Flare was a way of trying to re-envision and kind of bring sort of high-level event systems into React. And we took a load of ideas from React Native, and we looked at other frameworks like Flutter, and we looked at like lots of things in that space, and we came up with a collection of ideas we thought would be really good high level. But kind of as Sebastian mentioned earlier, we realized that lots of these ideas flourish much easier when in user space and a lot less when they're coupled to the framework itself. Because in user space, you can change things quickly, you can come up with innovative new ways of tackling problems. And what we saw was internally as well was that we had teams that had different points of view in how things could work. So come up with an opinionated way that React should deal with accessibility from the early stages wasn't going to be something that would scale. So what we did instead was we kind of had this idea of handling focus and dealing with focus management, like keyboard focus management, as sort of like components or hooks that could exist in user space, and that we could embed them within our Facebook products, and we could see how they work internally. And as we call it dog food, we could dog food things and find out if they're successful, if they need tweaking, if there's something about this that works. And that's kind of how that all went along. We plan on bringing a lot of that knowledge we found and some of the results we found back to the sort of open source arena, I guess, in the future, once we ironed out some of the things around those APIs. Because what we did to make them work was we explored experimental APIs within inside React itself, which allowed us to move fast, but also it showed us where some things weren't too great for us to use and some things that needed to be tweaked a bit further. So once we've ironed those kinks out and we can find out what the like ideal sort of like API and sort of what the surface area we want to tackle, I guess we could look at how they could be expanded and brought back to open source and into React in the future. And I guess that kind of tackles another point. It was like, what's happened to React Flare? I know it was asked a few times. So React Flare, like I mentioned before, was this idea of an event system a big event system that you could attach within React, and it would have its own sort of like ecosystem. We kind of felt that wasn't the right approach. And what actually makes more sense is if you kind of tackle things from like an add event listener, sort of low level way of dealing with things, and you build upon it in layers. And then you can build these layers as hooks, as custom hooks. And then people can design their own event systems. Like you can design a responder system, which is how React Native and React Native Web work in user land. You can even design entirely new systems that work much more like Flutter and other frameworks and engines out there. And by doing that, you can then find things that work. And once those things are found, we can kind of bring them back. But by doing that, you need to have the low-level primitives available there to begin with. So we've been looking at ways that you can do that by using like an add event listener or something similar, and how you can use it with concurrent mode, how you can do it with the batching, with sort of like event replaying, all these sorts of concepts, and how it can all fit together so that you don't fall out of the pit of doom and more into the pit of success. So hopefully that tackles the points from that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I know you have a hard stop, so I have one last question for you. Whatever happened to React Flare? That is a question from the community. What happened to React Flare, and what are the alternatives that the team's considering?
So React Flare is it was always meant to be an experiment to begin with. And the name was kind of like an internal name that kind of leaked out and became a thing. But from React Flare, we see it as those ideas weren't lost. They're more like we found lots of new problems and new ways of tackling things without having to necessarily go down the route that we took with Flare. So in the future, and hopefully soon, you'll see a new modern event system that we've been working on that tackles a few problems to deal with some of the drawbacks of the current event system, and also enables future Reacts to work embedded together in a better way. And it might also tackle some problems to do with performance and also to deal with memory consumption. So there's lots of different spaces in that area that we can tackle. And what interestingly it enabled us to do was it enabled us to clean up all the old code so that we can add in new features in the future that tackle, like I mentioned earlier, sort of the things that we want to do with low-level primitives. So how we can, for example, make it so that you can add an event listener onto something, maybe the document, rather than just like a div, or maybe you want to add it onto the window. And how do you manage removing that listener? How can React work with it so that it works with the delegation and event system within React? How it can provide all the sorts of benefits that React gives you to do with handling like state updates and etc. So all these things are there's I guess two categories. There's the platform provides you these and React provides you these, and how do we make it so that they overlap and you get the best of both worlds? So hopefully in the near to short-term future, you'll see this new event system, and from there you'll see the other workings of what we've been exploring internally.
Nice. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you answering those questions before you had to bounce.
That's cool.
Maybe it's a good time now to, oh yeah, thanks Dominic. Maybe it's a good time now to talk a little bit about what we're working on now and the roadmap and stuff like that, because I know we got a few questions around that.
Many questions both in the Twitch chat and on Twitter. What's happening with the React roadmap? What's happening there?
Dan, you want to talk about that?
Sure. Yeah, so we haven't really posted a comprehensive update for a while, I guess. I think part of it is just that we've like we've shared some of the things that we were working on, probably a bit too early in retrospect, because we thought that the projects would take, that they would have like the scope that would be, that the scope would be less and that we would finish them faster. But the scope kind of kept expanding, and I think we see the light at the end of the tunnel, in the sense that a lot of the things that were hypothetical or unclear or like completely unproven a year ago, we actually have like good solutions now, and we're actually running this. So like things that were theoretical or research a year and a half ago are currently rolled out to production, and we know that they actually work. But we also had a few setbacks, and we had a few cases where things just didn't work out, or we knew that our initial approach didn't really make sense. And there were also a few cases where we knew that we could release the thing that we have, but we know it's not the best foundation, and that we actually know how how to go around it in a different way. And we felt that it's our responsibility to the open source developers to not release something that is half baked, and instead that we're willing to kind of spend time getting to the point that we feel good about it. So in terms of like the current projects that we're working on, we're still working on concurrent mode, suspense. There are some things in concurrent mode that like it didn't really make sense the way it worked. So like entry is working together with Luna and with Brian on a scale of pretty big refactorings to change the model to make more sense. But there is also, like, I guess one thing that people keep asking about is, okay, what's happening to suspense with data fetching? And so we did release an experimental build of React, like experimental branch of React in November. And that is the thing that is documented on the website in experimental concurrent mode section. So it is usable in the sense that it works together with Relay, and this is exactly what we're using in production. We know that it actually works. But most people in open source don't use Relay. And so we've been thinking more about what is a responsible approach to data fetching. And our thinking has shifted quite a bit to a model where we actually don't think it makes sense to run so much JavaScript code on the client in the first place. And if we are in a position where we are rethinking how data fetching should work in the React apps, we also want to couple that with the opportunity to rethink how much code runs on the client and move more of it to the server. And so this is still very early, like to talk about the project. Maybe like we could answer a few questions about it. You might have seen some code name references to Flight. So this is the kind of the code name of this project. But the idea is to run less code on the client, run more code on the server, and kind of have like if client and server rendering are two ends of a spectrum, to have a solution that sits closer to the middle instead of having be like all the way to the client, like a lot of React apps today, or like all the way up to the server as like traditional Rails or PHP apps. So we want something that is more flexible and that is like it ties together into both suspense and data fetching and a lot of other features. So we feel like we need to have a solid story in that area before we can say that like our work here is done and this is the thing that you can use. But the downside obviously is that it's taking more time, and for now you kind of like if you do data fetch and you just do whatever like people do today, those approaches are not going away. But we think that we need to flesh out the story a bit more. So I'm not going to give you dates because it doesn't really work out on this team.
We've stopped promising on timelines. one thing to mention maybe is that like the timeline for all of the flight projects, which are, you know, very ambitious, is that's a longer, more ambitious timeline than the timeline just for an initial concurrent mode release. So as of now, the plan is to release a stable version of concurrent mode even before we have a full data fetching story, which means for most people it won't be like as exciting as maybe some of the demos you've seen, but it will at least give people the opportunity to you know, start their new projects in this in concurrent mode, migrate their existing ones perhaps, and also like crucially it'll give frameworks like Next.js and Gatsby and Apollo and whatever, React Router, whatever else, they'll have the opportunity to make sure that their frameworks are compatible with concurrent mode and can use all the latest idioms, so that once we have better advice and better tools available for kind of a data fetching framework story that we're really confident in, they'll have already done some of the hard legwork to get the community up to speed.
Nice.
I'm gonna head now. Thanks
Okay.
everybody.
Bye, Dominic. Thank you.
Bye, Dominic.
See you later. We have had a few questions about various state management solutions, libraries, things. People asking about context versus recoil versus all kinds of different things. They just kind of keep going. Does the React core team have more integration plans with RxJS? Lots of recoil questions. Anyway, can you talk a little bit about recoil and your thoughts on it? Because there's probably been like 10 of those.
Well, first we'll just say like Recoil is a Facebook open source project, but none of us here are officially affiliated with it. That doesn't mean we like disown it or whatever, or like that we think it's terrible. Just that it, you know, although it comes from Facebook, it's not like us directly working on it. So you shouldn't think of it as like being endorsed by us directly. It has a few interesting ideas. Does someone else want to speak on this? Maybe Sebastian. There's a few ideas that we think we might incorporate and like into some upstream proposals. Sebastian, you want to maybe talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think the Recall has a couple of features in just as a library itself, and interesting hooks to plug into things like serialization. But I think what people really, the really new innovation here is like, one is that it's tightly, it looks like React, right? Like it's Reacty in the sense that it's not, you're not expecting it to be an external store that you can work with other libraries. It's a React library in its core, and there's a couple of features there that makes that more suitable for integration, because it's kind of synchronized with React's reconciliation and the commit phase and all this stuff. But the real feature that I think is the core of it, and I think the question mentioned this as well, is that you can dynamically create new kind of data sources from inside of the tree. There's still a couple of things that are unsolved in there, such as what is the way to define the lifetime? Like, does this memory live forever, or does it have a garbage collection mechanism? Or so it's not fully baked as an idea yet. But I think that particular feature is very interesting. But it also dovetails on another feature, which is the performance of updating specific contexts inside of the tree. And the way it's currently implemented makes it not 100% compatible with all scenarios of concurrent mode, but I think it's doable. Like the general idea there is doable. And then in parallel, there's also this great work actually done from external contributors on optimizing context propagation with something like Redux selectors. And I think the way we implement these things together will be essential to how we incorporate these ideas, because it's not enough to just dynamically create contexts from inside of the tree, but also it needs to be fast to update an individual one of those contexts when it propagates down the tree. And getting this all integrated with something like concurrent mode is a little bit tricky, but it's not impossible. So I think the way we would address them is address them together. And I think that is a very important topic because there is a kind of a limitation and pain that people feel using just reducer now, that if you have a large app, that propagating all of that context down the app could end up with performance issues. So we think of that as a very high priority thing, but it's kind of a phase 2 because it's not coupled to any other features that we want to put into concurrent mode and get the first release out. So it's kind of delayed until that, and then we'll take a look at it.
For the super beginners who like don't even maybe know what state management means or is like overwhelmed by the options, like a good rule of thumb is just to start with use state and use reducer, and don't stress about having to learn all of these other frameworks until you really find a need. You might be surprised how far you can get with just the built-in hooks. That's not to say you shouldn't learn Redux or Recoil or XState or whatever, but you can get very far and make very complex, ambitious apps without those frameworks.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a question that I haven't heard of before. Is React going to be rewritten in Rust? Is that just a rumor? What's all of this?
Well, if we do rewrite it in Rust, we would do it in such a way that you will not notice it. So because
that's sneaky.
If we did, it would be like the internals. I mean, maybe there's a feature in some distant future you could like write components in Rust, but that's not when people allude to that. That's usually not what they mean. They mean the internals might be rewritten in Rust. Like currently they're written in Flow, flavored JavaScript. So unless you're a contributor, which we care about those as well, if we did rewrite in Rust, it probably wouldn't affect most people who are listening right now. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that, but that's not happening tomorrow or the next day, maybe next year or the year after that.
I think that in general, there's growing support for Rust within Facebook projects. So for example, the Relay compiler work is currently being done in Rust, and they've had great success with that. There's React Native internals. I think there was a question, actually, I can answer that at the same time, about Swift in React Native. And the current big project for React Native, codenamed Fabric, is C++. And so you can expect most things to be going in React Native to be going more towards C++ to share a code base, and also because of performance, especially on the Android side, but so that we can share the code between them. So I see less of the Swift taking over on iOS and more C++ taking over on iOS, just so that we can also share it with Android. But there's a lot of interest on the people writing this in C++ because they see Rust and they see all the features to be able to take advantage of that. And there's also interest in Facebook in general to be using Rust for native apps. But there's a lot that goes into that to making sure that actually works in practice. There's a lot of build tooling. There's a lot of things to set up with ecosystem. Rust isn't particularly well tested on ARM, and once you start writing in Rust, you have to now download the whole standard library that can then make your apps larger than equivalent C++. So, and the same thing applies to the web. Once you start writing in Rust, it wouldn't be Rust, the standard Rust you see, because the standard library would be way too big for us to include with the React release. So I think there's a lot of momentum in this space, but there's also a lot of work left to do to make that infrastructure actually work well. But it's exciting if it does.
Yeah, I saw in the Stack Overflow State of the Developer survey that Rust is the most loved language, and it's been winning and climbing in the ranks for quite a few years now. So I'll be curious to see where it goes. as a language and as more and more people adopt it, for sure. What about TypeScript? I've been seeing lots of mixed opinions about TypeScript and React.
I feel like that could be interpreted multiple ways. Does anyone have strong TypeScript feelings? Luna, I know you've worked with the TypeScript team, like collaborated with them on some of the JSX stuff. So we have a very good relationship with them in terms of just the two technologies collaborating. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Luna?
Sure. I feel like I've used both TypeScript and both Flow, and I don't really have that strong of opinions. Like whatever gets the work done is fine. Yeah, working with TypeScript is great.
Yeah, in terms of, I don't know if anyone else has thoughts on this, just jump in. But in terms of like, is one preferred over the other? Like, it's clear that TypeScript has the momentum in the ecosystem. We use Flow for the React code base, but that doesn't mean that like I'll rephrase that. It is probably the case that because none of us on the team are TypeScript experts, that we could probably be doing more to give like really good first-class support for TypeScript. Like for instance, the official public types are not maintained by us. Maybe there's a world in which we should be more directly involved in maintaining those types so that we're confident that they're correct. As far as I know, most people have a pretty easy time developing in TypeScript, and I think we would be interested in being a little bit more involved since I know that is a very, very popular way that people use React.
Yeah, I've been seeing more and more libraries built with it and converting to it and stuff, and mixed feelings. Some people are just like, wow, this makes my code better, and a lot of people are like, why did I do this to myself? So,
Yeah. I think sometimes people. Sorry, you go, Seb.
I think we do take that into consideration when designing new APIs. So like some of the flight stuff, we put a lot of effort into thinking about and testing how would this look in Flow and TypeScript, but also other languages that are kind of popular on the web, just to make sure that there's nothing that shoots ourselves in the foot when designing an API. And I think there's an implicit thought that if we were to write React in TypeScript, that would improve the user experience consuming React. And I think that's the case for a lot of libraries, but for some reason it's not really the case with React because of how the type information tends to flow from kind of user space code to user space code, and we don't really inspect it from inside React much. That kind of causes this system where even if we were to write it ourselves in TypeScript, we would still write external lib definitions that would be separate from the implementations. So there's not really that much value we get from writing it in TypeScript, and we just have it in Flow right now. And I think it's more likely that we would rewrite it in Rust as the next step rather than rewriting it in TypeScript.
Interesting. There are a few different questions just about your coding processes in general. Are there any tools that any of you all particularly love to work with, both as like on the IDE side, but also things that help you code better? What are some of your favorite tools?
Brian, you want to maybe answer that? You don't have to.
Yeah, what kind of tools are we talking about, Cassidy?
We've kind of had various questions on all sorts of things. So why don't you just say, like, what kind of computer do you run? What IDE do you use? Do you have a fancy linter? Do you have a color scheme you love? All kinds of stuff. Tell me about you.
Oh, color scheme. Yeah, it's always going to be the Dracula color scheme.
Oh, that's a good one.
And I use the dank mono font. Everyone always asks when I post screenshots. So that's clearly the most important stuff. I don't know. IDE, we're all over the place. I think a lot of us use VS Code. I'm still using Sublime because I don't want to relearn all my shortcut key like muscle memory stuff.
I use WebStorm.
Oh, okay. WebStorm. Yeah, fancy linter. I mean, yes, lint. Like pretty typical stuff. I think that a lot of React developers use. Definitely, Dan's rules for hooks lint plugin is super useful. It still catches me making mistakes within the DevTools code base, even after using hooks for a while. So that's cool. Yeah, I think most of us on the team are probably using Mac OS with MacBooks. It is a little bit easier to get up and running with the open source stuff that we do. We try to keep our projects so that folks on Linux or Windows can contribute too, but every once in a while I see an issue be raised about something that doesn't quite work correctly on those OSs. So you can sort of tell that the core contributors are mostly the same OS. I don't know.
I'll mention a few open source tools we use like in our repo. Like we have a bunch of really cool scripts that have been written by various people. I directed that question to Brian because he's worked on a lot of them. Like for instance, we have a set of release scripts, which I am a huge fan of because they make our release process incredibly, I mean, there's still a little bit learning curve. They can always be better, but compared to when, 4 years ago when I joined the team, our release process is really great. Our build scripts, which Dan and Dominic mostly built a few years ago, is great. That's built on top of Rollup. We use Jest for all of our for our test suite, which has been amazing. We have a really, really solid test suite, and I'm very happy with like kind of the development workflow of Jest watch mode. We use Babel, and we are the stuff that we publish to NPM is compiled with Clojure compiler, which I think is a kind of a cool process because it allows us to do some really cool optimizations that, at least as far as I know, aren't that. I haven't seen it. People use Clojure compiler that much in the JavaScript ecosystem, and I think it might be an underappreciated tool considering how powerful it is. What else do we use that's super? We use Prettier, which I am a huge fan of. I also use like the VS Code Prettier tool, so I can just like reformat on save, which is super nice. As far as syntax and color themes, I am a huge fan of Sarah Drasner's Night Owl and Light Owl syntax themes. Before she released those, I was like switching every month to different ones because I could never decide on something. And now I don't even think about syntax themes anymore because it works so well for me. And I think a few other people, I know Sophie, Sophie Bits, who most of you are familiar with, is also a huge fan of Sarah's syntax themes as well.
Yeah. Ricky, you got a lot of love for WebStorm in the chat. They were very excited for you. I'm surprised no Vim though. I expected one person at least, but that's okay.
I think Sophie was our Vim user. The rest of us are IDE users.
Yeah. I admit I was very much like fighting to stay on Vim for the longest time, and then VS Code is really nice. And especially because it has Vim mode and everything, it sucked me in, and now I love it.
I think ideologically Vim appeals to me, but I am just I just like using what I feel like most of the other people in my community are using, and so like right now it seems like that's VS Code. So
hipster, cool. It's kind of fun to see all of the workflow questions. People are very excited about that. Do any of you have external monitors, or do you just work on your laptops? Especially working from home.
I got an external monitor in the office, but I haven't invested in one from home. So I've been straight laptop for the last few months.
Wow. I feel like I've spoiled myself with my home monitors. I don't know if I could ever go back to just laptopping it.
Mm-hmm.
What are you gonna say, Brian?
Well, I'll just answer for everyone else. I think Dan and Seb, as far all are laptoppers. I don't think I've ever seen them using.
I was going to comment on the fact that Seb had an external monitor, but he hung a picture from it in the office.
I don't think I've ever seen him use his monitor. It's just like covered in dust and the.
No, I actually got a new monitor that I liked, and I used it for a few weeks, and then COVID happened, and I'm like, screw it. And also with the
For what?
with the editors, I used to customize everything, and recently like I got a new laptop and I was like, I'll just install code, use a default theme, everything default. Like I hate it, but at least I don't have to like fine tune it again. It's fine.
Yeah, I am kind of similar, where I don't like tweaking things from the default because I don't want to have to mess with like getting used to a very idiosyncratic setup. And that's probably why I never got into Vim, because like if I could use stock Vim and it was usable, then maybe I would. But like I don't know anybody who uses just stock Vim and is productive.
No.
So I think that's the reason why I've never really bothered to invest learning it.
Dan, you had an external keyboard that you used for a while on top of your laptop because the keyboard was broken.
On top of
Classic.
it? Did you just like strap it on and went for it?
I would just carry it in the back together with the real one, and so there is this is for the previous MacBook, which is why I changed my laptop. It was just so horrible. There would be like I think I had like 4 or 5 keys just fall out because I didn't bash them or anything. It's just like 2 years passed and they started falling out like teeth. And there is actually like a useful so there's a program you can download. I think it requires some kind of kernel access or whatever, like a driver. But after you install it, you can tell it to ignore the built-in keyboard, so that if you put the Bluetooth keyboard on top, it doesn't match the keys below it. Yeah, it's super convenient. So I was just like using it, but it was silly, and I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore.
I admit I almost started 3D printing something to attach a keyboard to my laptop so I could do something like that. And then after a while I was like, this is too extreme. I could just plug it in or use my desk and that would be totally fine. There's a question saying, is it possible to deep link to a section of the React site that is client-side fetched? Deep link to a section of a React site.
I think Brian and I saw this question
got asked to me on Twitter, and I don't have a good answer for it because it's not really a React question. It's sort of just a general, if I understand it correctly, it's a general question of how to have the browser jump to an anchor tag for content that's late loaded, and so it doesn't jump on the initial navigation because the content's not in the page. And I don't think there's a general answer for that. I'd be happy to talk with about it on Twitter, like after out of thread, but I suspect I'm not going to have a great reusable answer, unfortunately.
That's okay. Thank you.
Routing,
but I will follow up.
It's a very complicated topic. So I would look into, like, if you're using a router system already, like React Router and or Next or one of the other ones, then and ask them about how you would do it with their particular solution.
There's a few questions about you people as people. What are some of your hobbies and things that you like to do outside of work, outside of React? How do you invest in your mental well-being, being on such a high-profile project? I know Dan and I have played Fortnite a few times. I assume that's your biggest joy.
Yeah, I don't really have hobbies. If you say on Twitter that you don't have hobbies, people are gonna get mad because like, well, you're supposed to not think about programming all the time. And I agree. You shouldn't. But I'm also pretty lazy, so
and also coding is a fun hobby. I know you're not supposed to, but I also like coding.
Yeah, I think it kind of comes in waves. Like sometimes I want to do it, sometimes I don't. I have a hobby in the sense that I have a side project, which is like a JavaScript course I'm working on. But other than that, I just like to watch YouTube, to be honest, and just play PlayStation.
A lot of people are saying watching German series is also a hobby, Dan. What about the
Brian has lots of hobbies. I'm always envious of Brian's many skills.
Ooh.
I don't know if he wants to. We can't hear you, Brian. I don't know if you want to plug your.
Oh, there.
No, I do. I do music. There's like music equipment behind me, which you can kind of see.
I was curious about that.
Running is super helpful. Like I find that just getting away from the desk, getting outside, getting some sun. Like sometimes you can solve problems better if you just step away for a bit. So I'm a big advocate of just doing something physical in the middle of the day or after your day if you're a desk job person.
For sure.
Yeah, anything that gets you outside. Like I like to snowboard because you get to get outside, hike, camp, stuff like that during the summer.
Nice. I am terrible at snowboarding. I did a conference in Austria, and the like latter half of it involved snowboarding, and I was just kind of on the kiddie hill with a bunch of children passing me by, and I was like, don't think about your dignity the entire time as I fell on my face over and over. But I respect you for liking snowboarding because it seems like it's so fun once you get good at it. I'm just not there yet.
I have a very similar experience. I grew up like on the beach, and not near mountains. So the one time I went, it wasn't even snowboarding, it was skiing in Tahoe. I was just proud of myself for not falling over. And then these 5-year-olds come by and they're like going around my legs doing figure eights and stuff like that. And I'm like, well, don't feel so great about myself now.
You're just like, well, whatever. I can code at least.
Yeah.
Cool. Luna, Sebastian, what about you?
I think I tried to like learn a specific topic, especially like working with my hands one at a time. So if usually I kind of get really focused because that's kind of how I am in general. I get focused on one thing and I can't let it go. So for a while there, I was learning how to make craft cocktails. And I just did that all the time, which was not really healthy. And then recently it's been coffee. And I think I kind of mastered that now in a sense. So now I'm moving on to the next topic. We'll see what that becomes.
Nice.
Yeah, I feel like most of my hobbies have been put on hold since COVID. Like I used to do partner dancing a lot, and you can't anymore.
Cool.
Because you can't touch people's hands. I used to ski, but those are closed. I'm going hiking a lot and running. I think that's like what I've been doing recently.
Nice. What kind of partner dancing do you do?
West Coast swing.
Nice. I like it. I'm not good at it, but I really enjoy doing it when I can.
Very fun. I used to do ballroom too in college.
Cool. That's awesome. Wow, this is so fun. We are also kind of on time. I just noticed the time. It has been so fun having all of you on the stream. I know that there are still lots of questions coming in. Maybe we could do this again sometime as like a second date with the React core team.
Yeah, I wanted to say before, well, first of all, thank you so much, Cassidy, for hosting this. This has been amazing. Like, and on very short notice too. I think we just like raised the idea a few weeks ago and you're like, yeah, sure, you can do it on one channel. I wanted to say that the React team would like to do more of these. We'd love to like join Cassidy again on her stream, but we're also interested in if there are any other streamers out there or people who host events that are interested in like having us on, or even if it's not a Q&A, if you just want one of us to come on and like answer some questions or present something, we would love to collaborate with any of you as well. Shine a spotlight on some folks that maybe we haven't met before. Like, unfortunately, I think we all know Cassidy very well, but I'm sure there are lots of folks out there that we haven't met and that we would love to kind of invest some time into shining a light on what they're doing and what they're creating. So if you're interested in that, reach out to any of us on Twitter, and we'd be happy to work with you.
Awesome.
I'm probably not the best person to reach out to just because I have a lot of DMs and I don't read them all. So maybe reach out to Andrew.
Yeah, reach out to me, or the official React account might be a good one too. Or just pester all of us. Like eventually we'll see it. And I'm like keeping a list, and we'll try and make sure we listen to everyone.
Would you all mind dropping your Twitter handles in the chat so that way people can see those?
Sure. Yeah, it's also on the React website. If you go to, there's I can't remember what's the actual URL. Someone remember?
I actually think I can find it. React.js team. I found it. I'm going to paste it into the chat myself.
Yeah, and
There we
that'll
go.
have all of our like little short blurbs, and then like our Twitter handles and stuff like that.
Cool. Well, with that, I'm going to say goodbye to the React team. Say goodbye, everybody. Thank you all so much for coming. I really appreciate your openness and not keeping us in suspense with what's happening next. Haha, I'm sure you've heard that one plenty of times. Okay, awesome. Well, everybody, thank you so much for coming. This was such a fun time. I hope you had as good a time as I did. I will definitely be having more guests on occasion. Last week we started a little JavaScript project where we kind of just made something up, and it's a little game, and I'm going to be polishing that up the next time we stream. It was lovely seeing all of you. Wow, this was so fun. Thank you all so much for following, for hanging out. I am playing Pokemon Go. Yes, I am. From my couch, but I'm still trying. If you would like to keep chatting, you can ping me at cassidoo on Twitter, on GitHub, on CodePen. Also, I have a Patreon, and it's just patreon.com/cassidoo. Patreon.com/cassidoo. Put that in the chat. And we have a very, very active Discord. And if you want to come on and hang out with us, that would be great. I wanted to thank my two mods so much, Tom Zors and the Jonesy. They've been kind of arguing about if C# or Java is better the entire time in the chat, but hey, at least they kept y'all honest. But thank you all again so much for joining in, and I hope you have an awesome day. Till next time, bye!